All right, y'all, we got Saturn at its final degree in Pisces this week, alongside Jupiter and Chiron having a conversation, asking us to get into them feelings and start to do some healing, because we got Uranus conjunct the Sun, giving us a Cazimi, shaking up the most rooted, the most fixed part of our charts. This is the astrological forecast for the week of May 14th through 20th, what I'm calling Facing the Patriarchy. So let's get into it. So welcome back to Yappin with the Stars, the show where I talk about life and spirit with the help of the planets, stars, and zodiacs, with a little bit of common sense thrown in as well. I am your host and guide, Nicole Rouse, anthropologist, astrologer, artist, and professional dreamer. And here we do astrology and anthropology my way, grounded in the body, tied to spirit, and connected to the world that we're actually living in. Every Wednesday, we check into the chaos that we call society and ask two questions. What's the cosmos showing us this week? And what are we being called to move, create, burn, or build? All right, y'all. So we're going to start off with the weekly forecast, go into a little astrology 101. But this week is going to be a little different. I'm going to do a little astrology testimony. We got to testify, because here's the thing about astrology. We can talk about it theoretically all day long, but it really only makes sense when we put stories to it, when we put a kind of script to it based upon experiences. So I'm going to do a little astrology testimony as I talk about with this full moon in Scorpio that we just passed, left alongside some astrological transits that I'm currently in. And then we'll get into the Yappin part of the conversation to figure out what does all of these transits and all of this kind of cosmo movement mean for us on the ground. All right. So this week, again, we do weeks on this show from Wednesday to Wednesday. Why? Because Wednesday is the day of Mercury, and might as well use and work with the planet of communication to communicate out what the cosmos are saying. So we're doing Wednesday to basically Tuesday into the next Wednesday. So starting on May 14th, the moon will start off in Sagittarius, and by the 20th of the end of this week, it'll end in Pisces. So where the moon is moving us through kind of the last remnants of the zodiac, which is really fitting based upon the other transits that are occurring this week as well. Namely, on May 14th, we have Saturn is going to still be at 29 degrees Pisces. So last week I talked about Saturn going from 28 degrees into 29 degrees. 29 degrees is a critical degree in astrology. Now, I'm not necessarily somebody that does degree theory, but there are certain degrees that you do pay attention to. The ones at the very beginning, so a 0 or a 1 degree, but also 29 degrees. And 29 degrees is the end of something. It's ending a house before it moves into the next house at 0 degrees. And so Saturn is ending its cycle in Pisces. But it's not just ending its cycle in Pisces that it's been in for about, 2.5 years. It's also ending its cycle through the zodiac. So we're completing a full Saturn cycle of 28.5 years. So as the moon is going through Sagittarius through Pisces this week, right? Again, Wednesday to Wednesday, that is the kind of end of the zodiacs. We're also seeing Saturn, the most outer inner planet, also ending its full cycle in the zodiacs, asking us to really reflect and review upon what we have learned these 28.5 years, as Saturn is asking us now to mature into a new timeline, a new way of being. And that is happening alongside the Jupiter that is in Gemini is going to be sextiling Chiron in Aries at 24 degrees. And this Jupiter-Chiron sextile is going to be happening for a little bit, for a couple of weeks from what I was looking at. And this is a really interesting energy together, because just as Saturn is ending a cycle, right, again, in the deep waters, asking us to review and reflect upon things like our faith and authority and tradition, and what does it mean for us to understand that these things are not fixed in nature. These things also must move. We must move our traditions. We must move, right, our time, because time is always moving. There are multiple timelines happening at one time. Saturn, the rings, representing those different timelines, right? But none of that is stagnant. None of Saturn's properties are solid. It is all gas, reminding us that things will always change. So how do we engage with change? Because even as we must stabilize something, that stability fertility is dependent upon the structural context and the societal context that we are in. So what do we actually need? So this is where I think Jupiter sextiling Chiron, Jupiter and Gemini sextiling Chiron and Aries is helping us out, because it's asking us to reflect upon, right, the philosophies and strategies and underpinnings of what will actually bring us healing, particularly to ourselves, our bodies, our sense of selves. This is Aries, right? So Chiron being the wounded healer, one in which things that have happened to us, namely at birth through the institutions that we grow up in, that wound us, that we then end up reproducing until we can face it, and that becomes the best form of our healing, both of ourselves and others. We are collectively really being asked to heal our relationships to ourselves and who and what we believe in. Jupiter in Gemini is showing us very much so, Jupiter being the planet of expansion, but also the planet of wisdom, y'all, the planet of philosophy, the planet of travel, because it is through traveling and experiencing that we're supposed to gain experiences that we should translate into wisdom. So Jupiter is this idea of time and flow and philosophy and higher learning, right? It is faith as well. Again, this is why it rules things like Sagittarius and Pisces in traditional astrology, right? Well, Jupiter expanding itself in Gemini, the planet of communication, the planet of air, the planet at the crossroads ruled by Mercury, we are seeing that the more information we get, we are not very good at discerning, because as the state is pumping out information at us, right, we have to be grounded in our bodies and understanding where our head is, Aries being the head, in order to ensure that the information we are taking in is actually helping us, or is it harming us, or in something else, right? There's a discernment that has to happen. So Saturn in the last degrees of Pisces, alongside this kind of Jupiter sextiling Chiron energy, is really asking the question of who and what do we believe in and why, right? And what's been revealed in these endings that we need to believe in, to believe, therefore, by being embodied in our experiences, so that we can make decisions as we are going to be entering into fire. Saturn moving into Aries on the 24th. We'll talk about that next week, hitting up next to Neptune. But then we're also going to be activated also with air once Uranus makes its way from Taurus at its last degrees now into Gemini. So Jupiter, to me, is giving us a preview of what we are going to be experiencing for at least 8 to 10 years, when Uranus, which is a higher octave of Mercury, is in a sign that it really likes to be in. So if all those downloads are coming, if all this information is being given to us, if we are being fed these new technologies, again, whose head is leading in the discerning of what will actually help us collectively be able to heal and come back into our humanities. We're going to get more into that as I go into the yapping section. But I do want to highlight that. And I also want to point out here, and we're going to get into this a little bit later, is this is also really an interesting transit to happen alongside the naming of a new pope for the Catholic Church, right? So this is a time in which the Catholic Church has announced this new pope, ushering in a new chapter in an old institution that under the previous pope was trying to move into a quote unquote more progressive direction. Yet I always ask whose definition of the progress is being used and through whose perspective. This is also what we're being asked to kind of sit with and grapple with these transits as well. Because this tension between kind of old and new traditions and reinventions, right? The cycles of life, death and rebirth, right? Are being made apparent as we are seeing old guards come down, but those old guards still wanting to maintain power in some way, some shape, somehow, right? So who and what fills that void? And we have to make sure we're not leading with our wombs, right? The wombs of those in power who need us to keep giving up our bodies to it, giving up our authority to it, to some kind of so-called higher power, right? As a way, because we have been taught that somehow we can't trust ourselves, that we can't do for ourselves, that we don't know what's good for ourselves, right? Taking the power back means you also take back your power and can then reimagine what to do with it. And this is this Neptune and Aries energy that was really going to get loud once Saturn moves into Aries on the 25th. But again, we'll talk more about that next week. But I want to signal it now because this is the time of reflection, review, and also, again, who and what do we put our faith into? All right, let's keep going, y'all. So on May 17th, then the sun then meets Uranus in Taurus. This is what we call a Cazimi. I've talked about this before, I believe, in a previous Cazimi. But anytime the sun conjuncts a planet, it kind of combusts as Cazimi. Why? Because the sun is hot. The sun is what provides vision and light and heat to the whole solar system. And planets cannot get close to that sun. The only planet that can really get close to the sun is Mercury, but it can't stay there for too long. So this is why if you have in your natal chart sun conjunct Mercury at a very tight degree, that so that it's combust or it's Cazimi, it can sometimes feel as if you can get overheated, or that your kind of voice picks up heat or speed as you're going, or you can almost feel tongue-tied sometimes, because it's like your brain and your mouth can't meet because everything's coming at once. That's a kind of example of the energy of that kind of Cazimi of a sun that can usually happen with that sun Mercury, because Mercury is never that far away from any one sun due to the location and the proximity of Mercury to the sun and its rotation around it. Okay, so that's a little backstory about Cazimi in the sun. So the sun, because the sun does its job, the sun brings light to something, the sun brings energy to something, the sun will burn something up. And if it needs to be combust in order to be remade anew, that is the function of the sun. You can also think about this with Leo, as the energy of Leo being ruled by the sun, right? So when the sun meets Uranus in Taurus, this is going to happen at the exact same time the three inner planets, our most personal planets, are having some conversations. Mars in Leo will be squaring Mercury in Taurus, that is going to, and then trining Venus in Aries, okay? So Mars then is having a conversation with Mercury and also with Venus. So these are personal planets happening at the same time that the sun, which is also a personal placement, a luminary, is meeting the outer planet of Uranus, the planet of change, chaos, electricity, rebellion, revolution. It is the planet that knows transformation through change, right? Transformation through abruptness, through, okay, you say you want this now, we're going to make it happen. Just break the shit and then remake it. So this energy is really about shaking up what is the most rooted, what is the most stagnant in your chart, in your life. And so how do you find that? Pull up your chart and look to see what house Taurus rules. Now, again, I look at the chart through a whole signs, Western tropical whole signs perspective. So when I'm doing my my weekly forecasts and talking about these transits, that's how I'm running the chart. So if you run it through Placidus, your Taurus may go through two different houses, okay? So whatever house system that you know how to work with your chart, use. But wherever Taurus rules is where we're the most rooted, where we're the most fixed. It's the fixed sign and it's Earth, right? Now, that's not always a negative. Fixedness is not negative. I talked about this, I think 2 episodes ago in Astrology 101 about the different modalities of cardinal, fixed, and mutable, right? And fixed energy has a purpose. It stabilizes something. Once something gets initiated through cardinal energy, you got to figure out if it works or not. You can't just be making up new shit and not actually enacting it. That's what fixed energy does, right? But when we live in structures and societies that have constructed this idea of fixedness and rooted in stableness through this idea of disassociation by giving up your body and being kind of this martyr and always giving and not expecting anything in return, right? There is a way that we have to counterbalance that. We have to kind of renegotiate that understanding and contract so that we are not depleted, that there's actual reciprocity, right? So when we're talking about then Taurus and what needs to be shaken up, Uranus is at its last degrees, because it will make its way and ingress into Gemini for a little bit in July before coming back in a retrograde and then staying there next year for the next, 8 to 10 years. So what Uranus at the very end of Taurus is doing, and the sun is there, the sun representing your ego, yes, your sense of self, your light, how you enact your moon, because the moon is the body, it is the emotional and the physical body, right? It is ruled by the tides, because our body is mostly water. So the sun is how we enact that body, right? But the sun also represents the father, as the moon represents the mother. And the sun also represents then the patriarch. And so when we're thinking about the sun conjunct Uranus in Taurus, not only is this Uranus helping shake up our most rooted parts of ourselves so that we can turn the body on and start to get in the body, because we have to use that as part of our technology, as a logic that we rely upon. Again, Uranus making its way into Gemini next is saying, y'all, learn from this Jupiter and Gemini shit. who and what do you believe and why? Because if a bunch of information is just out there, an abundance of information, how do you discern? What are you discerning? What is the logic or logics you are using? Whose eyes are being used in order to figure out what makes sense for you? Okay. So in order to do that, you got to make space in the body. So I've always said this to folks who have experienced any kind of major transits in Taurus lately, that if you've been feeling physical changes, if you have been purging in the bathroom a lot more, taste buds have changed, your body has expanded or contracted, if there's a lot of ways in which it's almost like your body is talking to you differently or forcing you to listen to it because it is turning on. And this is the point, especially with the Sun-Uranus Cazimi, because it's also going to be shining a light and asking us, what is our relationship to the Father, to the Patriarch, to the construct that we have been told and shown through the ways that we have been understanding ideas of love and relationships and war and passion and all of that, these inner planets, right? Mercury, Mars, and Venus. As they're having a conversation, we are also then being shaken up and asking and being revealed then the structures that have also rooted us in this understanding. Again, Uranus brings change and rebellion and disruption. So what needs to be disrupted and why, both personally for you so that you can understand and see different ways of being, but also society and structurally so that we really can make space for something new if we really want it. So then again, what needs to be shaken up when it comes to how we see ourselves and what we are holding on to that needs new grass, okay? And so in this kind of cycles that are ending, we must understand that things do need to come to an end. So change is here, change is knocking at the door. The planets are saying the next 2 to 3 years is a cycle of nonstop negotiations of change, which means that there needs to be new negotiations of contracts. And so this is what I'm also seeing with this Mars in Leo square Mercury in Taurus, but trying Venus in Aries, right? Venus in Aries, and I mentioned this when Venus first came into Aries a few episodes back. Venus in Aries is also seen as a very much a gender bending transit, but also placement. There is a bending of how we understand Venus through the sign of Aries, which is ruled by Mars, right? Same thing we see on Mars in Cancer. I would say that's also a bending of gender norms in these structures of society that have been predicated through and seen through a patriarchal heteronormative lens, right? So when we are asking to be shaking up tradition, because even Saturn, the planet that rules tradition and authority and all of that, is saying everything still must change. Culture still changes to shift with the ways that we change as we work with our environments, right? Then we have to shake up our logic, our thought, Mercury and Taurus, right? Through a kind of burning away of the things that have settled a little bit too much. Mars in Leo, Venus in Aries. We are being introduced to the energy of fire, but fire in the body. So again, when I talked about a few weeks ago that you need to wash your head with fire, this is why. Because if you don't learn how to work with that energy, with that passion, with that drive, with a different type of being, because the body is now turned on, it will work you, or you will think something is quote unquote wrong and you'll stuff it down. And that's when you do get sick, right? The body is a living vessel. The body is a sentient being. You don't need to believe in quote unquote woo-woo shit to believe that your body is actually alive. Okay. So we have to believe that, and we have to understand what does that mean then, because it is not just the mind that is controlling the body. The body actually needs things, and it has its own technology and its own ways of talking to us, which is, again, our emotions. So when shit combusts, when shit blows up, when there is chaos, do we know where our feet are so that we can ground and center and figure out how to meet chaos with our own different strategies? This is strategy making energy as we are in times of transition. Then finally, on May 20th, the sun will then be at 29 degrees Taurus. So right before it makes its way into Gemini, and we go into Gemini season, and it'll be sextiling Saturn in Pisces at 29 degrees. So endings, right? And so this is continuing the same conversation that will be started earlier this week, right? And now we have power and the people at the end of their ropes. So who is going to make the next move? We're at the end. Sun in Taurus, Saturn in Pisces. These are both structures of society, of patriarchy, of the ways that we have been taught to see ourselves and who to look up to. We have been rooted in this idea that we need a leader, a charismatic leader, right, that we follow. Has that actually worked? Saturn is in the last thing of Pisces, right? Its last cycle, once again, through these 28 and a half years, if we keep on repeating these patterns, has the shit worked? Does this work? And if it doesn't, do we dare to dream and then enact something different? Not just dream, but enact, because we've been dreaming and sitting in the illusions of delusions for a long time. Coming out of water and earth into fire and air. What is our responsibility in creating the worlds we say we want to live in? Okay? All right. So that's the week. It's not necessarily a bunch of stuff going on, but there's things that are going on that are loud, that are continuing these conversations. And again, when you're looking about astrology, y'all, please don't put it into like bifurcated moments. It's a continuous conversation. It's a continuous story that has us reflect and review retrogrades, that has us kind of then go back and repeat things. We see patterns, right? We have transits that harken us back to times before, and then we can kind of be in the present moment and situate ourselves so that if we can project out, okay, if I'm doing this here, maybe it'll lead me there. It's a way for us to situate ourselves in the actual mundane in the present. But how present are we? Hence why we are being asked to get in the body to figure out what presence is, okay? Now, this is a little astrology Q&A because I had a commenter, thank you for your question, on the YouTube ask a question about the kind of new moon, full moon cycle. So I wanted to answer it here. Last episode, I talked about the moon a bit, right? I went on a little kind of tangent about the moon and its cycles. And I said that, you know, the moon takes 2.5 days to go through a sign, but 28 days to go through a full zodiac. So that's the calendar, lunar calendar, right? But then I said when we get to a full moon, we're at the halfway point or 6-month point in that cycle. And there was a question about what does that mean? Well, I want you to think about it this way. Astrology is also a way we tell time and keep time, along with pattern recognition. And the moon has been one of the main kind of luminaries that we have worked with throughout various millennia as human societies, from growing things to planting to building and all the like, right? It's a way that, again, we tell time and how we have worked with other types of life. Plants, animals, water, land, and the like, okay? So keep that in mind. So when we think about the moon having 2.5 days in one sign, 28 days in a full zodiac cycle, which is the 12 signs, that's 2 ways to tell time. Well, then the third way is if we think about the new moon as a time to quote unquote plant something new, right? To kind of germinate, it's the dark moon, time of reflection, a time of review. When we plant something new on a new moon, the next time the moon will be in that sign will be when it's full. So that's 6 months later, right? Because it'll be 2 weeks after the new moon that will be in that sign, sister sign. And then 6 months from that, we go back into the next new moon in that sign, which means that from one new moon to the next, you are doing a 12-month cycle. Okay, so that's what I mean by that. So this new moon, this full moon in Scorpio that we just went through is that the 6-month cycle from whatever you planted seeds, whatever was happening around the new moon in Scorpio 6 months previously, you're seeing kind of the full illumination of it right now. And then when we get to the next new moon cycle in Scorpio, as we get closer to it, you're going to kind of see the culmination of that storyline or of that story that's being played out. Okay. And so the same thing's happening again with Saturn. So we're seeing this with the moon, but we're also seeing this with Saturn because Saturn has gone through its 28.5-year cycle. So it's interesting. The moon is 28.5 days. Saturn is 28.5 years. Again, I've been saying this for a while and I'm going to keep saying it. Saturn to me is the crone, not the patriarch. And now that Saturn has been washed through the North Node in Pisces alongside Neptune, I believe that as Saturn makes its way out into this critical degree of Pisces, moving into the sign of Aries, she is now reemerging once again as the crone, but different. right? The crone that has now been that was initially the crone that got confined through patriarchy because of the ways that these structures and systems that have dominated for a while have used and co-opted planets, right, for its purpose. And now we are seeing then that the shit ain't working. So now we're going to go back into a new definition of the crone. So the 28.5-year cycle is ending because Saturn has completed its return. So now it'll come back to Aries once again, beginning a new cycle. Okay. So let me know if that makes sense and if that helps. All right. Now, speaking of that full moon, right? This is a great way to lead into the next segment called astrology testimony. Okay, so we're going to do some testifying, and I believe in this because the best way to understand astrology is to apply it, and we apply it the best through storytelling, through story making. There's a way that we can take this kind of academic or objective perspective to what the stars are telling us, but it doesn't really make sense until we can kind of see it in action, see it in play, and see how it can play out differently. And so this is why people's stories are really important, but also the diversity of whose stories we are telling when we are talking about these transits, because we still operate within structures and systems of society that have marked our bodies in certain ways. So this is why I say you can have a bunch of exaltations in your chart, but if your body is red and has been contorted to be placed in a marginalized position that needs to not be so loud, so proud, so out there, all that exaltations will be squashed. And then you will internalize there's something wrong with you, or you will always be fighting, trying to get into the room, when in actuality, your chart can open up and tell you that in order for you to be able to really sit in that energy, you got to go somewhere else over here, right? And so this is even with astrologers. I really press astrologers to, when you are using examples of people to explain transits, to don't just use the same demographic or the same population of people. Diversify as well your own locations and experiences of explaining these transits, so that you're not just feeding into a same narrative that gets people thinking that a transit or a placement needs to look A, B, or C. If we can have A through M through Z, right, of the ways it can express itself, then we can start to understand and be more comfortable in our differences, in our humanity. This is why stories matter. All right. And as an anthropologist, this is why we collect the stories, but also supposed to be working with them, because it's the mythos, it's the patakis, it's the storytellers, it's the musicians, it's the DJs, it's the culture, it's the dance, it's the pottery, it's the archaeology, right, of our civilizations, of our societies, that really shows us how and why it is important for us to be grounded in the creative, because that is what makes us human, not this reproduction. Okay. And this is honestly what I've been learning in the transit I'm currently in. So what am I in? So of course, we all went through this full moon in Scorpio, right? I'm a Scorpio rising. So that full moon did hit me pretty hard this past Monday, because this full moon was at 22 degrees. I talked about this last episode with the monsters, revealing themselves. And the monster that revealed itself to me was me, right? Because I'm Scorpio rising. Uranus is in my first house, conjunct my ascendant along with Lilith, opposite my moon in Taurus. That is conjunct my Chiron in Taurus at 22 degrees. So this full moon was illuminating my own wombs, was illuminating the other self, because it's house 1 and house 7 opposition. So the house of self and the house of the other. Now, when I say the other, I'm not talking about it in terms of the kind of post-colonial dialectical of like Spivak or Said. I'm talking about the literal other, like something other than you, okay? But we could bring the theoretical in. That's a whole other conversation that I would love to engage with, the 7th house as an understanding of the other via the colonial project. But that's not what I'm mean here, okay? I'm talking about just the other side of you. It is the shadow. It is what's furthest from us, because that is where the sun is setting before it goes into the underworld to battle out, to come back up to the light again in the first house, right in the horizon. So the 7th house is our one-on-one relationships, that we tend to be attracted to people who have the traits that we're trying to figure out in ourselves. And that's not negative necessarily at all. We understand ourselves in relationship with others. We are social creatures, right? That is the dialectical, I am what I am not, a bit. And so we kind of figure out who we are more by going into that 7th house and experiencing things with others. And it's not just romantic, it's any one-on-one contract. And I've learned a lot actually through my business contracts, because I work for myself and my clients, just as much as I've learned through my relationships romantically as well, because both of them involve some kind of finessing. Both of them involve a kind of foreplay in terms of a connection and a getting to know one another, right? In a relationship, and is it working or not? There's a lot of kind of similarities in relationships types. We just have been taught to bifurcate them. Why? In order to keep ourselves confined so that we're not actually building the societies that we need for one another for care, because that would be counter to the structure of capitalism that needs us bifurcated and always consuming, never actually being and creating. Okay. So that's what this full moon was highlighting for me, highlighting what do I mean by safety and security, right? Because that wound is there. That wound, and I will be very honest about this. There is a wound of security and safety and feeling like I always have to be that for others. Starting in childhood, it's the damn country song, right? Moon conjunct Chiron in Taurus. I got a sun in Leo, but them motherfuckers are squaring each other. So I got two plant luminaries where they really want to be, but in a tension with each other that had me internalize a bunch of shit that now I got to purge. Again, Taurus being this idea of the body and what needs to be released. And this is happening while I'm at the end of my Uranus opposition. So let's talk about that. That's what I want to focus on for this testimony, is the Uranus opposition. So what is that? Well, it's what it sounds like. It's when your natal Uranus is opposing the transiting Uranus. Happens around the age of 43 to 44. So I'm 43 right now. I'm toward the end of this opposition, and I'll be 44 in August. And so the last, I want to say year, this bitch has been on opposing itself on my ascendant, on my sense of self in the 1st and 7th house. And so a lot of my one-on-one relationships have gone through some dramatic changes. Not only, again, like I said before, during a couple of the earlier transits that I went through is when I realized that not only did I not want to be in higher ed anymore, working for institutions that were sucking me dry, I also realized I didn't want to be in a marriage because I wasn't straight. I was gay. So I came out to myself, came out to everybody else, left the marriage, left the home, like literally left the home, left the job, and kind of quote unquote blew up the life. But it was a life that was already on shaky ground. But again, Taurus being the location that's most rooted, I was committed to seeing it through until the stars said, but baby, do you really want to? And then I had to answer truthfully. Here's the thing, y'all. Tell yourself the truth so you stop lying to yourself and others. And I really do mean that with love. We have to tell ourselves truths so that we stop lying. And that's what happens. We lie to ourselves, therefore we lie to others. And so the relationships we built are based upon a house of cards because no one is able to truly be honest with themselves about what it is you need, and can the other person provide it? And if what they need, can you provide it? And if not, can y'all it be okay realizing it may not work out, you got to go somewhere else, but then what does that mean? Can we do it through care versus through this idea of conquest that we've been fed? Okay, so I'm in this Uranus opposition right now, and this is where I've been feeling feral because everything had to change. So what happened was I changed my name. I was originally a Truesdale, and that was my name growing up. That's my daddy's name, right? But I'm one of 8 kids. My parents had 7. I'm the oldest, and I have an older half brother from my dad's first marriage, my brother. But I'm just saying half so you understand it was 2 different marriages. But of all those kids, I'm the only one that was not given his last name at birth. My parents didn't get married until a month after I was born, and in the hospital back in the 1981, mama black, my daddy white. They didn't believe that he was the daddy. And then I came out, and I was light. They didn't believe that I was her baby. It was a hot ass mess, y'all. I got 4 placements in Libra in the 12th house, and that tells that story of a hot ass mess of a birth. And then here I came, boom, Uranus and Lilith, changing some shit. So I found out at 17, when I was applying for FAFSA, that my last name was actually roused by the government, because when I tried to do FAFSA and came back, they said, girl, you don't exist as a Truesdale in this capacity. So long story short, I went through Truesdale my whole life until about 2 years ago when I was on my birthday that I got a really big download that says, you might want to think about changing your name back to who actually claims you. This was the ancestors talking. And then I had a former friend call me literally that day, very talented medium. And she was like, listen, I don't know what this is, but I keep getting like hints that you might want to think about changing your name back to something. She's like, what does that mean? And then I told her the story about how I was originally aroused and then Truesdale, blah, 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 because she knew my family. So longer story, even shorter, that it took me a little bit because again, Taurus is where I'm most rooted in our chart, right? And so I will be most rooted in maintaining the relationship as is, including with myself. It was in January when I decided to go on a no smoking weed for 31 days. And again, me and my weed have a nice conversations, but I realized I was using it as a crutch versus working with it. And so at the beginning of the year, I trusted my body. My body said we need a break. I let the break go, and that's when the downloads really got even clearer, very crisp. And it said, no, you can go back to Rouse, go back to who claimed you. And so this Uranus opposition, again, lightning, it's change. It's also the higher octave of Mercury. It can bring downloads, right? I will say this for those in Uranus opposition. Many people have told me I feel like I'm crazy. I would argue you're not. You're just turned on. Your body's turned on. You actually are able to work with the technology of your body. And since it's in Taurus, it was turning on my body. It was opening up. So I also have gone through a lot of purging. I have had to change what I eat once again because I can't handle certain foods. I've been up and down in weight. Now the weight has gone down again because I've dealt with the inflammation because I had to stop smoking the weed in order to figure out what was actually triggering me, and it was the food. You see what I'm saying? So like all of these things, it was helping me, and it seems so simple because it is, but the simple things, right, aren't always easy to do because it does require a big shift in what we have rooted ourselves in. Again, Taurus, and then its opposition in Uranus opposition that I'm in, it really is upending a lot of stuff. So I had to listen to my body. So that sober journey in January led me to figuring out that I had food issues once again that I had been ignoring, which then led me to go on a basically 2-month detox with the support of my doctor to get this inflammation out of me because it was having detrimental impact on my health. So after I stopped smoking weed, I went back to it, but I had a different relationship with it. And then I went on 2 months of no drinking as I was trying to figure out, along with rooting out different foods, to figure out what was inflaming me. And that is when I realized and had the clarity that I completely pivoted my businesses. I had been trying to do this for a while, but again, the rootedness, right? The idea that, well, I got to keep it the same because I got to keep my clients. Well, guess what, y'all? Before Trump came into power, they were already rolling back contracts, especially governmental ones. My business took a big hit. I think I talked about this last episode. My business took a big hit back at the end of the summer. And shit was drying up then. So there was already inklings, and I was already getting pushed to, okay, go ahead and do what you really want to do, because what you think you're supposed to be doing to maintain your safety and security is not making you safe and secure. You're actually highly stressed out. You ain't sleeping. And this is repeating the cycle that you've already been through when you were in those institutions, right? This is just the body talking to me. Right. This is my body talking to me. This is all Uranus opposition. And so that's what's led me into shifting my businesses. And I'm in the process of doing that now. And when I started doing that actually in January is when I got new client. I got a new client that helped me experiment with a process through my embodied futures lab called Embodied Strategic Dreaming, that I combine astrological assessment with strategy and strategy making through a structural analysis so that we can take and remake an organization's or an institution's dreams and really think about what does that mean and bring them into reality, working with your energies, not against them, right? And, once I committed to that, it opened up a whole new road. And then that's when also I got more serious about, okay, I want my poetry. The poetry started coming alive. The words started flowing again because I had to break through the conditioning that I had been put through in higher ed that took my words and remix them into conformity to be palatable for them. It's taken me years, but then once I finally called my words back and said, I want to work with my words, right? That's when they were able to come alive. And that's when I started making music. And so now I'm part of a group called Shy Marinage with me and my homie, and he's a sound producer and sigil maker and a musician and artist, and I'm a poet. We're combining his sounds and my poetry, and I'm also realizing, well, bitch, I can also make music because I'm hearing music now, right? So Uranus really did bring the creative out of me. And so there's a way that when I found my feet by coming into my body, I'm figuring out where my head is and the direction I'm trying to go, right? And so that is a lot of faith. So I would also say that what Uranus opposition has brought up and brought out is that I have to have faith in me. which is really shaking a lot of this idea of faith that I was taught through the Catholic Church because I grew up Catholic, right? But even, and also taught through the ATRs because I've been trained. My people come out of hoodoo from the South, but hoodoo our way. But I've been trained by various hoodooists, by trained by babalawos, by, a couple of mambos in these different traditions. And even with that, I had to still come back to the idea that I had to have faith in me, which is Ori work, which is higher self work. And so Uranus has really opened that up for me as well. So that's the story of a Scorpio rising in a Uranus opposition, y'all, about to hit a Saturn opposition who has grown the entire fuck up. And let me tell you something, growing up is kind of ghetto, but also I understand because we do have to grow up into our humanity. We have to take responsibility for the fact that if we want to live, that we have to decide what living means and looks like for us, okay? And so let's go into Yappin time because this goes perfectly into what I want to talk about this week. And this is all about healing, y'all, and how healing ain't linear. All right. I really appreciate the lessons that Jupiter is giving us in Gemini and now having this conversation with Chiron. I don't feel good, but it is needed lessons because the abundance of information that has been poured out to us over the past year in particular has shown just how good the strategy of making the U.S. population sick and ignorant enacted itself. And I don't mean that in some negative or some harsh way. I mean that in we have to realize what it looks like when people commit to a strategy and commit to it and double down in it over space and time. And this is the end result of it. We have a population in which we are not being taught or trained how to discern information, yet we are being inundated and dumped on with information nonstop. And now that we have this kind of machine learning that people, we are being fed as AI technology, and it's really not yet there. It's still machine learning, right? It's still trying to figure itself out. We are now seeing people truly give up and over their thought to these machines that are then feeding back to them information that they're just taking at face value without really grappling with it. Because again, we have not been trained in society to discern. And this is literally the byproduct of the Southern strategy. In the dismantling of education, the dismantling of social services that we saw through Reaganomics that then got reinscribed through the rest of the presidencies, whether they be Democratic or Republican. I'm tired of the binary way in which we talk about politics. Both parties, in some way, shape, and form, have followed the same strategy because the center kept getting moved more and more and more conservative, more and more right. And instead of combating that, people just followed that trend. Now, folks call it the Overton window, but this is really a cycle that we see repeating over and over again, and we see it in astrology. When you have societies that go through subjugation, who are breaking free in some way to create new pathways, you then see a backlash. Right? There is a way that system is still going to try to figure out how to maintain itself one way, shape, or form. So they backtrack it and backlash in different ways. And the backlash to the civil rights movement in the 60s has been this steady eroding of rights. Even as we have, quote unquote, gotten them, we have also had other things taken away. So yes, we got things like affirmative action and gay rights and all of this stuff. Well, now then, that shit got taken away now. But when that was happening, we also at the same time saw social services being removed. We saw the ways that the actual nation state itself was removing its responsibility to serve all of its citizens. Why? Because the citizenry and who had access to all rights of citizenship opened up. Right? So when you see an opening, there is always this kind of reaction to it. So this, again, these patterns that we're seeing. So what we see right now, Jupiter saying, y'all, all this information and no discernment is not good. So what do we got to heal? Well, it's having a conversation with Chiron. Baby, you got to heal the self. You got to heal the head. We got to heal the head. But in order to heal the head, you got to feel your feet. So Saturn's there in Pisces at the end of the rope, at the end of the line, saying, okay, 20 and a half years. The last few years, Saturn has been loud, dog walking us through her signs of Capricorn, then Aquarius, and now having us go into the deep collective waters of Pisces, right, to wash ourselves of the ways we have been taught structures and systems through these very rigid, violent, patriarchal systems. As I said earlier, Sun conjunct Uranus Cazimi with all these other placements, we have got to face patriarchy and ask ourselves that the way we have been taught who we should be looking up to and why, and how that looks and is represented, if it actually represents all of us. If we are able to move and take up space in our bodies the way we are through these types of governing systems. And if not, then what does it look like to take it back? All right. So this is requiring us to uproot, to excavate. And again, excavation has been a big kind of theme these last few weeks, and especially with this full moon in Scorpio. We are having illumination of things that have been happening 6 months prior, really a long time before, but really that have been uncovering. So we're getting all of these things being brought to the light, but then what do we do with all that information? Because if we're not been taught to discern, and then we get told other truths, but yet we don't know what our truth is, so then we externalize truths into somebody else's facts that then become our truths, then baby, who the hell's head is actually leading you? Many times this requires a facing of who and what then raised us, because we're trying to uproot and excavate things right now. And so who and what raised us many times is the family. Right? Parents, family, institutions, and society. And since we live in a society that is focused on patriarchy and the patriarch, which informs how our structures and systems are constructed and enacted, we are in a time of re-examining that relationship and how it has impacted us, especially when it comes to our sense of self, okay? And this is not me ragging on men. I'm saying the patriarchy. I'm not saying men. And I want to make that very clear, because people like to move conversations that make you uncomfortable. Sit in the uncomfortability, sit in it, and get curious about it. Don't turn it off. Lean more into it. This is what Uranus is asking all of us to do. We have got to blow up foundations that we are so rooted in that we are afraid to question them, because that means we're going to shake our own foundations. This is a very simple thing to do, but again, it is not easy. Ask the question and allow the answer to come up and through you, okay? And so when I think about the energy of this week and putting that in conversation with what has been happening and what is to come, this is really a time where we have to confront where patriarchy and the patriarch is taking root in us and face that relationship to see what stays and what goes. We have a new pope, okay? And people are already, again, like I said earlier, already going around claiming him to be a part of who they are, to represent them, right? But what if we stopped longing to be seen by institutions that historically have always been exclusionary and based on violent hierarchical traditions, and started to see that we have always had the power within us? If we bring that sun out, that ego, that sense of self, that power, then what do we create? What would we do if we stop placing our faith into patriarchal representations of God, spirit, the state, the self, whatever it is? What script could we reimagine? That's the tension between Scorpio, which is about transformation, and Taurus, which is about stability, and which is why believing your reality is vital via believing your body, especially right now, because we have been fed safety and security so that we adjust to discomfort as comfort. And like I said last week, do we believe the monsters knocking at the door? And I add this week that we are being asked to assess who is defining the monsters. Because if the monsters are determining who and what is monstrous to us, then we really do need to take back our eyes, right? By taking back our bodies and turning it on to help us navigate changes here. So how do we then work with it so that it does not keep working us back into these same loops, so that we are fed progress as something that is the same shit, just in a slightly different font, not even a completely different font, just a little bit of a shade different, right? What if we took that back? But here's the thing, y'all. In order to do that, we have to be able to see ourselves. We got to be able to see ourselves. And without seeing ourselves through the lens of the state, through the lens of patriarchy, through the lens of a Christian white patriarchy that will always tell you that something about you is not good enough, so you got to keep striving and giving and doing for something more. What if we said that that doesn't make any sense? Because if I wasn't good enough as I am, then why do you keep knocking at my door? Right? If how I am and what I look like is just not good enough, then why are you constantly knocking at me, trying to get me to come back to you? Flip the script, shake the table, Make the motherfucking walls talk and see what talks back. And if it allows you to be disruptive in your body a bit so that you can get curious, then you are actually working with this energy so that it is not going to work you. Okay. So let me stop there. Next week, the Sun and Mercury are going to go into Gemini, and then Saturn makes its way into Aries. We're going to keep this conversation going, y'all, because again, this is the energy of air and fire. And air and fire is quick, it is combustible, it'll get you to react. And we don't need a bunch of reaction. We need a lot of strategy right now. We need some grounding so we can work with the energy of combustion, with the energy of creativity. So again, this week, as you're going into it, really reflect upon this full moon in Scorpio. What monsters got revealed to you? Whose eyes were you using to define these things, right? And what happens if you then center your sight by centering your body as we go into this week and we start to see more of these kind of power structures and power plays really coming at us? Then if you ground in the body and ask your body, what does it say? What will it tell you? And if you actually do that, let me know. Drop it in the comments below. What is your body telling you this week coming in? What did the new moon or the full moon, illuminate that did have you have to shake up that opposite house a bit, right? So that you can really figure out what will bring you security, what is comfort, what is pleasure. All right. And let me know what happens there. Now, if you want to do some pleasure work in person with me, I'm actually doing a showcase on May 22nd at Dorothy Downstairs in Chicago. It's going to be a lot of fun, y'all. You think I'm funny here? Wait till you get me in person doing poetry, doing storytelling, and with some music, okay? We're going to bring the spirit of the ancestors who worked with pleasure along with the spirit of pleasure down with me and my co-conspirator, Forrest Brooks. So come on out to Dorothy Downstairs on May 22nd at 7 p.m. You can get tickets ahead of time on Eventbrite, which I recommend because that lets the venue know that people really rock with us. And I know you rock with me. You're going to rock with us. So come on out to Dreams of Pleasure, a Sonic Journey, May 22nd at Dorothy Downstairs. And again, I'll have ticket information in the show notes below. And if you're not here, but you know of other folks in the Chicagoland area who you think you would be interested, go ahead and share that as well. I really appreciate that. And I also have my books open for Journey to Self readings. I am doing a little bit of a revamp on my website, but by the end of the week, the astrology bookings will be up with some new offerings. One of the new offerings I'm having is a graduation/transition reading. It's a combination of natal and transit reading that will be alongside a short kind of intake form you'll do about where you're coming from and where you're trying to go. And so here I combine my understanding and reading of astrology with my training, not only as a former academic, but also as a former advisor. I was a former McNair Scholars Director and also trained and developed folks who did a lot of work with both students, but also faculty and administrators who were either moving positions, transitioning positions, or moving institutions. So I do a lot of transition work. So if you're in the crossroads right now, if you're graduating college, grad school, you are moving jobs, you are moving up in a position, there's a time of transition and change, and you want a conversation with the stars along with a consultation with me, then you can go ahead and book a graduation/transition reading. And again, that will be up on the website by the end of the week. And that will be an offer going forward. Okay. And finally, you can always find me on my Patreon. If you want to learn more with me, if you're interested in getting into divination, as a form of freedom taking and making, then join me on my Patreon. I have a number of different things I do there, from conversations to watch parties to music parties to having study sessions. So for more information, go to my Patreon. You can find the information down below. And as always, keep dreaming, keep exploring, because it is through the dreamscapes that we can actually bring our dreams into reality. All right, till next time.